This movie is based on a true story. It's about one man's incredible journey, someone brave enough to challenge the sky for the person he loves. Meet Sammy. He's 26, unemployed, and still single. Just an ordinary guy, until one day he makes a life-changing decision to climb Mount Everest. Even though he had zero experience in mountain climbing, Sammy still went for it. To him, this journey was proof, a way to show just how serious he was. About a woman named Nadia. Sammy's story slowly started to get attention. After saying goodbye to his mom, he was driven by his father to a local radio station for an interview, just before starting his climb. Before Sammy got out of the car, his dad gave him a simple but powerful piece of advice, and those words stuck with him, fueling his spirit. During the interview, the host didn't take him seriously. They questioned his motives, thinking it was crazy. A young man, unemployed, no climbing experience, suddenly dreaming of Everest. Their tone turned a bit mocking, and for a moment, Sammy became the punchline. But when they found out he was doing all of this just to prove his love for Nadia, something changed. The room got quiet, and little by little, their doubt turned into respect. In the end, they were so moved by his story, they decided to follow and broadcast his journey exclusively. In the middle of that interview, Sammy suddenly remembered the night when it all began. The night he made that big promise to Nadia. It was after picking her up from work. They stopped by a little cafe to hang out. They'd been close friends since high school. Always had a special bond, but nothing more. That night, while driving her home, Sammy finally worked up the courage to tell her how he felt. But Nadia turned him down. Not because she didn't like him, but because she didn't want something half-hearted. To her, if he was really serious, she didn't want just a relationship. She wanted something real, like marriage. And for that, she needed proof. Right then and there, Sammy made a decision. To prove how serious he was, he promised he would climb Mount Everest. At first, Nadia thought Sammy was just joking. With a playful tone, she said, "If you actually make it to the top of Everest, then maybe I'll think about dating you." She didn't expect much, but that one challenge lit a fire inside Sammy, a determination he never knew he had. And from that night on, he was serious about keeping his promise. As soon as the radio interview ended, Sammy headed straight to the airport. It was a long journey, hours and hours on the plane, until he finally landed at Kathmandu Airport in Nepal. There, a local travel agent picked him up and brought him to a small guest house. Meanwhile, back in France, Nadia was working her usual shift at the supermarket. A coworker came over and told her the news. Her story with Sammy had gone viral. Everyone was talking about them. At first, Nadia thought it was just gossip, but when she found out that Sammy had actually made it to India, she was shocked. She never imagined he would seriously try to climb Everest, just to prove his love for her. And in that moment, something in her heart began to shift. After dropping off his things at the guest house, Sammy took a short walk around the local market. Soaking in the atmosphere, he called the radio station to give them an update. He told them that the next day he'd be flying from India to a village called Lukla in Nepal, which sits at around 9,400 feet above sea level. That's where his climb to Everest would begin. The radio hosts and the listeners started to get excited. Everyone was waiting to hear what would happen next. The next morning at the airport, the travel guide tried to cheer Sammy up. He said the trail wasn't as scary as people made it sound. And even if accidents happened, people usually just ended up with bruises, or maybe a broken bone, nothing fatal. Instead of feeling better, that actually made Sammy feel even more nervous. About half an hour later, the plane landed at Lukla Airport, Nepal. As soon as Sammy stepped off, a local man named Johnny offered to carry his backpack all the way to the top of Everest. At first, Sammy refused. He wanted to save money, but as the trail started to climb, he ran out of energy and began to struggle. Eventually, he gave in and hired Johnny. Without saying much, Johnny picked up Sammy's backpack and just walked off, heading straight toward the guest house. Sammy panicked, thinking the guy had run off with his stuff. He rushed to catch up. At the guest house, while enjoying the mountain view, Sammy met Jeff, a professional guide who would be joining him on the climb. Jeff handed him a list of gear he'd need to buy before they could begin. The ascent was scheduled to start the next morning. That night, while Sammy was eating at a small roadside stall, he saw a group of locals walking by, carrying the bodies of climbers who hadn't made it back. That scene shook him, and for the first time since the journey began, fear started to creep in. The next morning, before setting off, Jeff gathered all the climbers for a briefing. He explained the route they'd be taking, along with the many risks they might face along the way. But the one thing Jeff emphasized most was safety. On a climb like this, it's not about who reaches the top. It's about who makes it back alive. Once everything was ready, Sammy and the other climbers began their journey, a long trek toward the highest mountain on Earth, Mount Everest. For hours, they hiked along the trail. Eventually, Sammy asked for a break. He was completely drained. His body felt like it was going to give out. But then he noticed a local porter walking by, carrying a massive stack of backpacks. No sign of struggle, no complaints, just calm, steady steps. Sammy stood there stunned, and in that moment, a wave of embarrassment hit him. He took a deep breath and pushed himself to keep walking. When he finally arrived at base camp, Johnny, who had gotten there way ahead, greeted him with food and water. Seeing Sammy's exhausted face, Johnny clearly understood how brutal the trek had been. As they rested, another local passed by, carrying a full-sized refrigerator on his back. Sammy could only stare, let out a long sigh, and once again feel just how small he was compared to these people. Meanwhile, the radio station called Sammy again to broadcast his climb live on the air. From the other side of the world, his voice came through the speakers inside his dad's car. Hearing him safe and well gave his father a deep sense of relief. Elsewhere, Nadia was on the phone with a friend. While chatting, she finally admitted something, that deep down, she had feelings for Sammy too. After the call, her mother joined the conversation. She said how grateful and amazed she was that someone like Sammy was willing to go to such lengths for her daughter. Nadia smiled a little shyly, her heart slowly beginning to open. Back on the mountain, once their energy had returned, the climbers continued on from base camp. During a short break along the trail, Johnny and a few local porters walked by again, carrying heavy loads of backpacks, looking calm and relaxed like it was nothing. For Sammy, it was another quiet reminder that strength isn't just about muscles, it's about habit, endurance, and heart. The journey continued, taking them through steeper, more challenging paths. Eventually, they reached an altitude of around 11,300 feet and decided to spend the night in a small village called Namche. At the lodge, after a much-needed shower, Sammy changed into his favorite soccer jersey and settled in to rest. A little while later, Johnny stopped by to visit. He noticed a novel lying on the table and immediately got excited. He said that because he was always working, he rarely had time to read. Moments like this, quiet and peaceful, were a rare luxury for him. Johnny also started talking about his favorite musician. He said that every time he hikes up and down the mountains, he listens to their songs to keep himself going. Music for him was like a travel companion, a way to stay sane during the long, exhausting journeys. In the middle of their chat, Sammy asked Johnny if he could take him to the market. There were still a few things he needed to buy before they continued the climb. After shopping, Sammy sat down at a small cafe, just taking in the mountain view and letting his body rest for a while. Out of nowhere, a group of other climbers invited him to join a local soccer game with the villagers. At first, Sammy hesitated, but then decided to give it a try. Turned out it was a blast. Unfortunately, Sammy's team lost the game. Afterward, while resting and tending to a few scrapes, he called the radio station to give an update. He told them that tomorrow he'd be heading to the base near the foot of Mount Everest. Somewhere else, Nadia was listening to that same radio broadcast. She smiled, quietly moved by his words. There was something in her expression, a feeling she couldn't quite hide. The next day, the journey continued. As the peak of Everest finally came into view, Jeff looked relieved. It meant they were getting close. Days passed, but as they climbed higher, signal got worse, and Sammy couldn't call the radio anymore. Back in France, Nadia started to worry. After work, she would sit quietly, waiting for a call that didn't come. Then one day, during a live broadcast, a listener suddenly called in, not only to cheer for Sammy, but to boldly say she wanted to be his girlfriend. Hearing that, Nadia couldn't help but feel jealous. She got so annoyed, she ended up slamming the radio in frustration. Bad news arrived. Sammy was reported missing. His mother broke down in tears while his father held her, trying to calm her down. That afternoon, filled with emotion, his mother went straight to the supermarket where Nadia worked. She let it all out, blaming Nadia for Sammy's decision to climb the mountain in the name of love. Nadia stood there in silence, her heart heavy with guilt. Meanwhile, on Mount Everest, Sammy had reached an altitude of around 15,160 feet. The path was getting tougher, and the air thinner with every step. Still, he kept moving, trying to stay focused. But exhaustion hit him hard. He lost focus and ended up falling behind the rest of the group. Panicked, Sammy rushed to catch up. But no matter how fast he moved, he couldn't find them. Now, he was lost. For a moment, he thought about giving up. But then he remembered Nadia, and that thought sparked his determination all over again. Sammy talked to himself, pushing his spirit back up, and kept climbing, even as his legs started to shake. Finally, at around 17,600 feet, he found his way back to base camp. That night, luckily, there was a satellite phone. Sammy immediately called the radio station. The moment they heard his voice, the host let out a huge sigh of relief. By morning, the news had reached his dad and Nadia. They couldn't hide their emotions, grateful to know that Sammy was still okay. The next morning at breakfast, Sammy met a fellow climber, a pro mountaineer who also worked as a reporter for an outdoor TV show. While chatting, the climber shared, "Most people fail on their first try, man. The Everest route's steep, the oxygen's low. Many only make it on their second or third attempt." He added, "If you ever feel like you can't go on, don't force it. You can always come back next year." Sammy said nothing. Sure, it shook him a little, but deep down, he knew. This was his one shot. He didn't come all this way just to quit halfway. His only option now, keep climbing until he reached the top. After breakfast, Sammy went through a health check. Not long after, Jeff gathered all the climbers, told them to gear up and meet at the edge of the ice wall. Since he'd never used this kind of gear before, Sammy was clearly confused. Thankfully, Joni was there. Without saying much, he calmly helped Sammy put on his harness and safety equipment. Once everyone was ready, Jeff gave instructions. Before they could head any higher, they needed to do some ice climbing practice first. One by one, the climbers began their turns. Most of them moved smoothly, like they'd done it 100 times. Then came Sammy's turn. Well, no surprise, he barely started, then slipped and fell. A few people couldn't help but chuckle. Seeing that, Jeff turned serious. He said, "If you still can't climb in 3 days, I'm sorry, you won't be allowed to go any further." Now the stakes were clear. If Sammy didn't learn fast, his journey would end here. That night in the tent, Joni noticed Sammy looking down. His face was blank, eyes lost in thought. Feeling bad for his new friend, Joni offered to help. Patiently, he taught Sammy how to climb the right way. Day by day, training continued, and finally, Sammy passed Jeff's climbing test. He was officially allowed to join the final climb to the summit. The next morning, all the climbers gathered for a traditional blessing ceremony with the mountain guide. After that, the climb resumed. But they hadn't gone far when they were stopped by a deep ravine. There was no other way across, just a narrow bridge made of 2 metal ladders tied together. This was the real test of courage. Meanwhile, back in France, Sammy's story had gone viral. The whole country was buzzing. It got so big, a journalist even showed up at the radio station just to cover the story. At an altitude of 7,162 meters, Sammy and the team stopped to rest at another base camp. The air was freezing, -4 degrees. Trying to stay warm, Sammy read a novel with Joni quietly sitting beside him. In the stillness, they chatted about love. Sammy also thanked him, saying it was only because of Joni's help that he'd made it this far. They laughed a little, sharing stories and dreams, but the moment didn't last long. Suddenly, the weather turned worse. Jeff arrived with a serious warning. "We can't stay here too long. If we wait, we'll freeze to death. It's better to keep moving, now." The climb continued, step by step. After hours of hiking, just as the sun began to rise, they finally reached 26,000 feet above sea level. The air was getting thinner. Every breath was a struggle. Seeing Sammy starting to slow down, Joni didn't think twice. He handed over his oxygen tank. No hesitation, no reward expected. Meanwhile, in France, Sammy's story had made it onto national television. At home, his mother watched the screen, eyes filled with tears, proud to see her son fighting for his dream on Mount Everest. Later that day, Nadia and her mother visited Sammy's parents. With a heavy heart, Nadia apologized and finally told the truth about how she felt. Yes, she was unsure before, but now she knew. She promised if Sammy came home, she wouldn't waste his love. She would give him her whole heart. Hearing that, Sammy's mom was deeply moved. She wrapped Nadia in a warm hug, a hug full of hope and silent blessing. Back on the mountain, Sammy used a satellite phone to send a short voice message. With his voice shaking in the freezing air, he said all he wanted was to take Nadia to the beach, just the two of them. He hoped this journey was enough to prove his love. As they got ready for the final climb, Jeff reminded everyone, "Up there, we'll need to conserve every breath. If you run out of oxygen, you won't last more than 5 minutes." At first, Sammy was still confident, but when he found out that Joni wouldn't be going with them and would be replaced by another climber named Dorj, he panicked. All this time, Joni had been his sense of safety. Now, without him, the final push to the top felt terrifying. Once everyone was set, Sammy, Jeff, and the team began their final ascent. Just one last stretch to reach their dream. Meanwhile, tension was rising. The radio held a live broadcast, joined by fans gathered in front of Sammy's apartment. Inside, Nadia and Sammy's parents sat silently in front of a laptop. No one spoke. They could only hope that Sammy was safe. But on the mountain, oxygen was running low. One by one, the climbers began to turn back. Even Jeff, the most experienced of them all, had to stop. He'd reached his limit. He looked out at the stunning view from 27,000 feet and felt at peace. He was content. Now only Sammy and Dorj remained. Step by step, they kept moving forward, through ice, wind, and air that burned with every breath. Halfway through the climb, Sammy started to struggle. His breath turned heavy. He began to panic. Dorje checked his oxygen tank and froze. It was almost empty. "This is too dangerous," Dorj said. "We need to turn back." But Sammy shook his head. He couldn't, not when he was this close. With tired eyes, he whispered, "This is my only chance." Dorj hesitated, then nodded. They kept walking, slow, careful. Every step a fight against the cold, the wind, and their own limits. After a long journey and a fight that was anything but easy, Sammy finally made it to 29,032 feet above sea level, the summit of Mount Everest, the highest point on Earth. One month later, the brave young man finally came home. When he met Nadia, he didn't say much, just reminded her of the promise. Nadia smiled, and in silence they hugged. No words needed. A few days later at the airport, while Joni was looking around for new climbers who might need his help, a pilot walked over, carrying a package from Sammy. Inside was a photo of Joni's favorite musician. He didn't expect it. But for someone who lives deep in the mountains, that simple gift meant the world. And right there, their story comes to an end. And that was the true story of Sammy, a simple young man who pushed his limits, climbing Mount Everest for love, for family, and for his own pride.